I'm Kim Johnson. I provide mobility and commuter programming in Wake County, and we are excited to see everyone with us today. Thanks for joining in on the discussion on mental health with Annie Schmidt. But first, I would like to give a special thank you to our regional chamber and business membership organizations that help to spread the word amongst their membership. Your assistance has helped make this group very diverse and a true representation of the business community. We decided to do a session on mental health because of the connection between good commuter programming, stress reduction, and employee productivity. Many employers working with our programs have converted to telework, staggered scheduling, or some sort of hybrid work arrangement due to the uncertainty of the past 12 months. In a recent Go Triangle survey of the region's employers, 83% said they had not offered telework in the past, but they plan to continue a telework program as a result of the pandemic. So we hope that this discussion today helps to support those intentions and that you find it useful and worthy of sharing with your coworkers, with friends, and with family. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to today's moderator, Patricia Crane. Tricia is Go Triangle's Go Parks fundraising specialist and our Youth Go Pass coordinator. Tricia?
Hello, everyone. Hi, welcome today. I'm going to go over a few of the nuts and bolts of Zoom. So if you're in the Zoom window, you should be able to see a small control panel with buttons where you can mute and unmute yourself and control your video. If your buttons disappear, don't panic. Just kind of wave your mouse over the screen and they should show back up. It depends on how you have your settings. We would love to see your faces regarding the video, but if you're welcome to keep your cameras off if that makes you more comfortable. And you can toggle between the view options up here, the gallery view. There's also speaker view, and we do recommend that if you're easily distracted by visual things and switching back and forth between a lot of windows will take you out of things. Just put it on speaker view, and that'll make sure that the only window you see is the one who's speaking at the moment. I apologize for any background noise. I have some rambunctious pets that have just decided now is a good time to join us. You should also see the buttons for the chat down there at the bottom and a button to see the list of participants. In that window, you can see some reactions to raise your hand. If you have space issues on your desktop, you can pop those windows out and move them around if that works better for you. You're all on mute right now, but when we reach the question and answer discussion portion of the program, please remember to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question, and you can turn your camera on then if you're comfortable with that. Of course, if you'd rather ask a question anonymously, just send it in chat directly to the hosts and we'll ask it for you. I think that covers everything. Hopefully we're all pretty familiar with Zoom by now, but if you have any questions, feel free to send a chat directly to me. You can do that by opening the chat window and choosing my name from the drop-down menu right next to the To button. So if you have any questions at all, just shoot me a chat and I'll see what I can do. Welcome, everyone.
Tricia, I'm going to take it from here. We want to give you a little background information before we begin today's presentation. Our work as transportation demand management professionals is simple. We work towards reducing the number of single occupancy vehicles on the road in the Triangle area. We work with employers and property managers across the region to establish commuter programming and promote carpooling, vanpooling, biking, walking, transit, and telework. Our programming includes supportive services like ride matching, incentive programs, individualized commuter assistance, and emergency ride home. All of our consulting services are grant funded and free to employers, both public and private. We provide support to companies with essential workers to safely get them where they need to go, and organizations with new or established telework programs, providing assistance in creating and strengthening telework programs and remote work policies. As employees begin returning to the workplace, we are seeing some increase in transit ridership, as well as a few more van pools and carpools returning to the roads. Along with this return, a bit of anxiety is not unusual, which can result in a loss of productivity. As we have found with COVID-19, knowledge and options can ease some of the possible anxiety. So no matter what your company or industry, if you're trying to determine what to do next for increasing or maintaining an effective workforce, our transportation management partners are here to help no matter what your transportation or telework needs are. We encourage you to contact us by visiting the gotriangle.org employer services page, or just click the link in the chat box to have someone follow up with you. We each represent various hotspots in the Triangle area, and I'm with the town of Chapel Hill as the Transportation Demand Manager. So I'm going to now send it back to you, Tricia.
Thank you, Len. I'm so sorry I didn't introduce you there. A bag of cat food was delivered, and my kitten decided that he was going to take it upon himself. That said, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Annie Schmidt. Annie has served as the executive director for the National Alliance on Mental Health of Wake County, or Nami, since May 2018. She has worked toward making the organization more sustainable, equitable, and inclusive. She received a master's degree in family, youth, and community services from the University of Florida, and a bachelor's in international studies and peace, justice, and conflict resolution from DePaul University in Chicago. Her background includes collaborating with community organizations to provide wraparound services in Title I schools and program planning and evaluation for child welfare programs at the Confederated Tribes of the Rond in Oregon. So let's all welcome Annie Schmidt. Annie?
Thank you, Tricia. And thank you for having me today. I'm happy to be here. I might also have some background noises. My husband is a teacher, and he's playing around with a drone for a class project, and it's scaring the cats. So I'm hearing lots of noises in the background, hoping that they have moved somewhere else. Thank you for having me here. Today, we're going to talk about creating a mentally healthier workplace. But I saw some of the questions coming in from an employee standpoint, so hopefully we can get a chance to address both of those. Next slide. So first, give a little bit of feedback as to what NAMI is. NAMI, we are the local affiliate for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Our mission is to educate, support, and advocate for people who are living with a mental health condition, their family members, and the community. And so all of our programs align in the educate, support, and advocate categories, and also align with which communities we are supporting. We are not experts. Although we do have some people who are therapists and psychologists who run our programs, where we see our expertise coming from is the lived experience. With our programs, we do have evidence-based projects, so we do get our knowledge from a research-based to play along with that. Next slide. So why I am happy to be here and speaking with everyone here is that you play an important role in the mental health of the community. So when people work, they have this positive feedback from working, that they're able to see that they are contributing to society, that they're able to utilize their skills and talents, that they have this purpose that helps their overall well-being. When you're looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you're able to help, give funds to help make sure that people have shelter, that they have, regular means to be. You're able to help provide opportunities for friends and give that overall self-actualization purpose. So you're hitting every notch of this. However, we also know that work brings stress. If we're looking at stress by the numbers, 94% of US workers experience stress in the workplace. 63% of US workers said that they are ready to quit their jobs due to stress. 2/3 of US workers suffer sleep deprivation due to work-related stress, and annually it costs the US healthcare industry $190 billion. When we're looking at sources of that stress, a survey that was placed on stress.org, they talk about poor communication and leadership changes being 80% of the cause of the stress, with workload and relationship with the direct manager directly behind that. This survey was taken prior to 2020, and I'm sure that those numbers would change. Next. So at the bottom line, work is personal. We always talk about how, this is just work. Don't take this personally. We just have to get the job done. But the truth is, it is personal. What we do for work is the majority of our awake time. You have the time that you wake up, get ready, commute, work, get back. And so it's not just a regular 8 hours of 24 hours of your day. It's usually a little bit more of that. And so it ends up making the majority of our life, the majority of our awake time. And so how are we coming to the office? How are we bringing ourselves there? Because we know that this workplace stress, between work and life, they end up intermingling. If things aren't going well in your personal life, sometimes that does affect your work life. And if things aren't going well in your work life and you have the stress that we were talking about, that could lead to poor dietary and exercise habits, poor physical health, and negatively impacting personal relationships. So next slide. Oh, actually, before we go to the next slide, I have a poll for the audience for who is here. So as we talk about how we are coming to work, do you feel that you can bring your full self to work? How comfortable do you feel bringing your whole self to work? Are you almost always bringing every part of who you are to the office? Usually, occasionally, maybe you're just like, this is this life, this is this life. I don't want them to cross. I don't want anyone to know about this. So what does that look like for you? Can you bring your whole self to work, which is making up the majority of your awake time, ultimately a majority of your life?
It looks like we have about 70%, 73%. It looks like people are still clicking, so we'll wait just another moment if that's okay, and then we'll post these results.
Absolutely. And then do you want to go to the next slide as we're waiting to see the results?
Sure.
Okay. So as we're waiting to see how this comes in, some of the things that might affect how you are bringing your whole self. We talk about statistics and people. Ooh, do we have results? There they are. Okay.
There we go. Sorry about that. There we go.
All right. So this is looking pretty good. That we have about 65% are usually or almost always. So that's a good place to be in. You have occasionally, not usually. And so let's talk about some of the factors that kind of play into this for the majority of why people don't feel comfortable bringing their whole self to work. So I would say if you're in the usually or almost always, you're in a good place. Things to consider with this. Marginalization. So if you're part of a marginalized community or a community that is not the dominant represented in the area, in the office, that could prevent you from bringing your whole self to work. In a study of the LGBT community, many of them express that they do not feel comfortable bringing their whole selves to work, talking about how they're spending their weekends. Can they feel comfortable being out in the office? Do they have protections that way? And having this non-inclusive work environment, not only is that decreasing their satisfaction with work, but also their overall mental health. And the same thing, looking at non-inclusive work environments and policies as it relates to oppression and overarching power dynamics. For instance, only in 2019, California adopted legislation to make sure that people didn't hurt people or there wasn't any discrimination based off of hairstyles and hair treatment, because they had noticed that people who are in the Black and Brown communities felt discriminated against because of their natural hair. And so being in a non-inclusive work environment does have a factor in that. But as we're also talking about mental health and where people are, 1 in 4 people live with a mental health condition. So if we have 1.2 million people in Wake County, We have more, if we're counting Durham and Orange and the surrounding communities, that's a lot of people who are living with a mental health condition. So they are coming to work, bringing their whole selves, living with something that affects the way that they think, behave, and interact with others. And with that 1 in 4 people, only 40% of them access care in a given year. And that number changes between 40 and 44 each year, but roughly about only 40% of people living with a mental health condition access care, which then puts a lot of stress on friends and family members as the main system of support for people living with a mental health condition. And for those friends and family members who are taking on a lot, the stigma in sharing that experience with others does not allow them to bring their full selves, that they might be embarrassed to talk about how police might have had to come and commit their child, or that their husband is homeless and they're not sure where they are living right now, or some other aspect of this, because mental illness is not seen as a casserole illness. And so they aren't able to bring their full selves to work either. So as we're talking about our full selves and who, what that really means, let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about the roles that we play. So I put a few roles up here because we're not just who we are in the office, but we have a lot of other traits with us too. We talked about a caregiver as somebody living with a serious health condition, as somebody who might experience tokenism or be part of, be a minority representation, who feels that they might have to speak for an entire group. But we have other roles on top of that too. So here are a few examples, and I want to ask all of you, what are other roles that you play? As we're talking about this, some people talk about, maybe they're also an entrepreneur. Maybe they have something else they have going on the side. What are some other roles that you play? You can put it in the chat and we can share with everybody. A teacher, absolutely, especially in this virtual environment. A lot of people have also had to be teachers for their children too. Organizer, yes. Advocate, motivator, parent. There are a lot of different roles that we play. A system of support, virtual clinician, absolutely. Decision maker. One of the things I didn't have on here before was homeowner. And if you're coming to work and then, you got a leak in your roof or something bigger happens that you can't make it work, something you have to deal with. Being a mentor for neighborhood kids. Yes. Things that might not have an official title or official role, but you're making a difference every day. Taxi cab driver. All right. Unofficial therapist. Absolutely. So for me, I am the executive director for Nami Wake County. I am also a spouse. I am a daughter. I am a caregiver at some points. I am a sibling. I'm a niece. I'm a cousin. I am a mom to 2 cats. Cat wrangler, absolutely. They do not wrangle themselves. And so we have all these different roles that we play. I also am the primary person who cooks and goes shopping. Yes, moral support for friends and family. Absolutely. And so there's a lot of different hats that we play. And sometimes we're more one than the other. But guardian, yes. The thing that has made this different is that in this pandemic, we're playing all of these roles at once. Next slide. So not only do we have this experience of stress that might be related to each of those roles, but we also have stress from the pandemic and stress from work. And now what we were able, why before we might have been able to separate, this work is work, home is home. You can't do that anymore, or at least it's becoming that much harder to do it. It's harder to separate the roles because you're playing multiple at one time and likely in the same space. And so there's a lot of different things that are happening right now. There's also racial injustice and things that are happening. The Anti-Defamation League just came out with a report yesterday about how they have seen the highest numbers for hate crimes and racism. And it came out yesterday, which also happened to be the day that we saw hate crimes against Asian Americans and the rising crimes against sentiment against the Asian American Pacific Islander community. And so if you're going through wearing all these roles, but you're also a member of one of those communities, you might also be experiencing trauma and its own form of stress on top of everything that you are experiencing as a mother, as a teacher, as a worker, as an employer, as a motivator, as a banker, uncle, everything else that you're doing. You might be also experiencing re-traumatization from all of this coming together. So your source of purpose and source of stress is the same as it always was, but now you have this added layer of stress and grief from each of these positions. And we know that this stress is affecting physical health, not only from our own personal experiences, but with the data that's coming from hospitals on suicide rates and overdose, that the ABC liquor sales were increased to where the Wake County government was able to give $5 million to Healing Transitions to open up their new facility. There are national studies on depression and anxiety. Kaiser Health Permanente put out a study a few months ago saying that 4 in 10 people were living with depression and anxiety compared to 1 in 10 pre-COVID. In Japan, they are seeing more suicide deaths than COVID deaths. So this is serious right now. It is an immense amount of stress that we are feeling. For me, I'll talk a little bit about myself and my own story. So I work in an industry that has seen an increased need, that from the very beginning of this pandemic, we saw people in our community who were struggling, that there were people who were worried about themselves, that they weren't able to get in touch with their doctor, with their therapist, that they weren't able to get their medication because they weren't sure what was going to be happening with the pharmacy, that there were members of our community who were dying by suicide. And so we had this need to adapt, that we needed to adapt to virtual. We needed to find ways to find support the people who were already living with mental illness and within our community, but also what are new ways that we can reach everybody? What are ways that we can help everybody who's experiencing this new form of stress? I also needed to support my team, that at Nami Wake, we value the lived experience. And so 100% of our staff and 80 to 87% of our board either lives with a mental health condition or has a direct relative who's living with a mental health condition. So how can I support my team as we're going through this? And I also had my own personal stress on top of it, that I bought a house. My husband and I bought a house. We were really excited about it. But at the same, 5 days after we bought the house, my husband broke his arm. And so I was a caregiver to him, but also the one leading the move. My dad had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer last Thanksgiving, and we had a big surgery at the beginning of the pandemic. They found out that the cancer was in his lymph nodes, and he was going through additional treatment for that. My aunt was also diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And not only was all of this happening at the same time, but I couldn't separate my roles. I was a dad, I was a daughter. I was trying to be there for my dad, trying to be there for my mom, how to support my siblings. What could I do for my team? What could I do for the organization? And it was hard. There was at one point where I had my team over and we were trying to plan for the next year and what could we do to see how we could do better? Where are the gaps? Where do we need to do to grow our organization to meet the need? And I got a text message from my mom that my aunt wasn't going to make it. And there wasn't anything I could do to separate my roles at that time. And there also wasn't anywhere else I could go. And the truth is, there's nothing special about this situation. I am not an isolated incident. I know of many others who are receiving text messages about updates on their loved one's health, others who are making decisions about taking someone to the emergency department, parents and caregivers getting notified that there was a COVID case at their child's care facility, people living in unsafe environments. And so if all of this is happening, what can we do? How can we recognize when this is going to be a little bit too much and give ourselves grace in the process? So next. So people are experiencing grief from a loss of normalcy, loss of a job, loss of a loved one, loss of experiences, in addition to the stress that is going on. And so with grief, it can look different in each person. And the response to the stress can look different to each person. Some people, may have stepped up to do a lot more so that they feel that they have control over something going on in their life when there's a lot that they don't have control over. And you might find others who are a little bit more withdrawn and a little bit more quiet. With mental health first aid, they also talk about signs of distress being an inability to perform usual tasks, absenteeism, irritability, withdrawal, not eating or sleeping, increased use of alcohol or tobacco. And so we know that a lot of this is happening, but when does it become too much? When, outside of just asking someone how they're doing, when is it that we really need to step in and do more? Next. And so grief looks different on different people. Stress and the way people handle it does look a little bit different. And through building relationships, we're going to be better at being able to see those changes. But at the point when we really need to step in and do something is when you see that it becomes disabling, that, a lot of people are going back and doing things in person now that the vaccine is becoming more available. However, these feelings might not go away. As we're talking about moving kids back into schools, because they're having such poor mental health, they might still be feeling those poor mental health things, and now they're just in a different environment. You might have this persistent panic or just increased hostility, and of course, thoughts of harming yourself or others. So at this point, this is when there are opportunities to intervene and do something different. Next. So what can you do to help? If this is a friend, a coworker, a family member, what can I do? So look, I have look, listen, link, and live, and there are a few other acronyms for what you can do. All of them pretty much lead to the same thing, is see what you're doing. Have, communication and having an empathetic listening ear are key to moving forward through this. But what do you see? Do you see changes that you can be specific about? What are things, talking and just asking someone how they are doing. And one of the things that might be, it's very tough to do, and you might be nervous about doing it, is if it seems to be this way and you're talking to somebody and listening to what they are saying, if it seems that it's pretty bad, asking them if they are thinking about harming themselves. And some people worry, if I ask them this, it might put the idea in their head. And it's the exact opposite, that the only way to prevent suicide is to ask about it. And so listen, have those conversations, those tough conversations. There's a website called seizetheawkward.org. And we talk about it when we do our programs with youth, and it helps give them ideas as far as how do I even start to have this conversation? Empathize, understand, really listen to them and see what do we have in common? How can you relate to what they are going through? And sometimes it is just saying, this sucks, this is awful. Not necessarily trying to make it better, trivialize it, or seem like what you have experienced is worse, but what can you do to at least acknowledge what they are doing and be there for them? Help connect them with resources. So in linking them with resources, what do you know that's available? What are things that you could help them find? Maybe it's helping them find a therapist, or helping them with something that they can do. If it's, I can do this childcare for you to help figure out what we can do here so you can have some alone time, so you have time to breathe. Maybe it's going on walks with them, and what can we do to be that listening ear and get them connected with the resources that are out there. That we have some at the end of the slideshow, but there's Hope for NC. That's a new line that anyone can call if they need crisis counseling, if they just need to know what resources they can be connected to. At Nami Wake, we have volunteers answering our phone 7 days a week, just if you want somebody to talk to. And so what are the different resources you can connect your friend or family or employee member with? And also what's important is living by example. What can you do to show that you are moving forward this way? Some of the other ways that people have done this is Dr. Javier Amador founded the LEAP Institute, which focuses on listen, empathize, agree, and partner. And so it's hard to take that first step and be there with someone as they're doing it. And for if you're talking about suicide or self-harm, theirs is question, persuade, and refer. Don't take this on together, work together to move forward. So let's go to this next slide as far as what can we do as employers? How can we support the whole person, the whole employee, so people feel comfortable bringing themselves to work because they already are, as I said in the beginning, they are here the majority of their lives. What can we do to support them in this process? The first part is creating an empathetic work environment where people can feel comfortable bringing their whole selves to work. One of the things that I've started in this pandemic is one-word check-ins. And so if you're, sometimes I bring out a word wheel. Sometimes I just like learning new words and telling people ahead of time they know what I'm doing. And so they'll look up words in the dictionary or thesaurus for which one, best suits their mood. And they don't have to explain anything else, just say one word for where they are, but also listen to the words that they're saying. So I used to have staff meetings on Monday morning, Mondays around 11. And every single time, the majority of time, I would get people who were just so stressed out from the weekend that they're nervous about the rest of the week. There might have been something that's happening. Monday morning was rough for my staff members who have children and trying to get them started in schoolwork. And so if everybody seems to be doing low, then let's do a check-in. Let's figure out what we need to do on our agenda, move it aside, and let's find time. Maybe we just need to breathe or take some mindfulness moments. What are some practices that we can do to help acknowledge this and not just ignore it? It's like, oh, wow, everyone's feeling awful. Let's talk about what our schedule is this week. No, let's address it. Let's figure out what we can do to support each other in this process. Encourage people to use PTO, but also you use PTO yourself. And when you are on your PTO, do not answer phone calls, do not answer emails, take that time off. And share part of yourself too, that lets them know that you are going through things too, that this isn't a unique situation. Be a little bit vulnerable, and it helps open the door for them to be a little bit vulnerable. Promote self-care programs and a healthy well-being. So maybe that's bringing in a mindfulness or a yoga instructor into the workplace to replace your staff meeting, or bringing in somebody else to do a healthy presentation, doing affirmations workshops. What can we do to promote self-care within the office? And also with offering flexible schedules. I can talk about myself that after everything happened, as I was talking in the personal story that I had shared earlier, I live with depression and anxiety, and my sleep patterns had really been messed up for the past couple months. And so I either sleep 11 hours a day or I am waking up every hour, and it's no fun. But either way, I am not good at making 8 a.m. meetings. And so I had to change my schedule up and figure out when can I realistically start, and just figure out what my schedule looks like from there. But most importantly, don't take this on yourself. Refer to outside resources, that there are virtual support groups. We offer some. There are other organizations that offer them more specifically. So they have grief-specific support groups. They have caregiver-specific support groups, dementia and Alzheimer's-specific support groups. Refer people to places where they can get the help that they need. Let people attend education courses, bring people in. There are tons of helplines if people just need someone to talk to. Find champions within your work environment where people feel comfortable sharing themselves with these individuals. And also with all of this, work with HR, that sometimes you might feel that your goals are different because you're focused on productivity and outputs and outcomes, and their goal might be on employee satisfaction or legal protections, but they are going to be an asset in moving forward with this. And so if you're coming up to them and saying, listen, I've made these accommodations, I'm listening, and I'm really worried about this one employee, what are our options? And work together on this. And maybe the employee doesn't feel comfortable sharing with you as their supervisor, but they'll feel better talking to a third party. And so, as I mentioned, do not take this on yourself as you're moving forward. Next. So here are a few different resources that we have available. Yes, employee assistant programs, also employee resource groups. So at Red Hat, they have a neurodiversity community where it's just a group of employees that work together to help each other with mental health and neurodiverse specific issues. So I'm with Nami Wake County. There's also Nami Orange and Nami Durham, and there's Nami North Carolina, who can help get you connected with the affiliate in wherever you live. That SHRM has a lot of resources on mental illness in the workplace. For those in Wake County, there is the Wake County Network of Care, which if you're trying to refer people to outside resources, if you're like, they need legal help, you can just go legal in a drop bound. I'm going to mess up if somebody asks what SHRM stands for. But it's a human resource manager group. I'm going to look this up right away because this is my brain. Yes, thank you. Society of Human Resource Managers. Thank you, Leah. Hope for NC, as I mentioned, it's a phone number that anyone can call at any time if they need crisis resources, if their insurance doesn't cover behavioral health care, they would be able to help refer you to behavioral health care. And then there's also workplacementalhealth.org that has a lot of resources. And that's it. And I'm excited to look at some of your questions.
Thank you so much, Annie. Really appreciate this. Fantastic information, and I appreciate everybody sharing additional resources in the chat. So as we move into the question and answer portion of today's webinar, I'd like to highlight that this session is not a political conversation, and the host and presenters do not make policy decisions. So we respectfully ask that all participants refrain from questions that are political and beyond the scope of today's discussion. Our intent is to engage in a conversation that's informative and provides valuable insight to enable employers and employees to return to work safely with a timeline that is best for their circumstances. So with that said, let's move on to the discussion. Again, if you'd like to ask something anonymously, just send it directly to me in the chat. If you'd like to ask your question yourself, let us know and we can highlight your camera when you're asking your question, and be sure to unmute yourself. It's not really a Zoom meeting until somebody starts talking while still being muted, but maybe we can set a record today. It looks like we already have a couple of questions, so let's go ahead and get started. Lori Lackland wants to know, how can employers on a corporate level be persuaded to invest financially in the well-being of their employees? She says, other than the "you are heroes" kind of lip service, she's thinking specifically of healthcare workers, but it can probably apply to a lot of other groups as well.
Well, I think the biggest part is, if you're looking at productivity, when people feel better, they're going to be doing better. And so I know for myself, if you're looking at what is self-care, if I am ornery, if I am not sleeping, if I am, loss of revenue, but loss of productivity and all of this together. So if I am not doing my best, I am more likely to be short with other people. I am more likely to not be making the connections that I could be making. And if you're looking at the loss of productivity overall with poor mental health, I can send out those statistics. I do not have what that is in front of me right now. But if you're looking at the cost of poor mental health, the cost of stress in the workplace, it's really high. So the cost of stress in the workplace was $190 billion to the US economy last year, or in 2019, not 2020. 2020 is going to have much interesting numbers. I feel like 2020 is just going to have an asterisk for everything. But you can tie it to productivity, you can tie it to employee well-being, but also in recruitment and satisfaction, that more people are feeling comfortable in the recruitment process, where they would ask, in the interview, what do you do to support well-being? And especially if you're looking at millennials and how you're going to get that next generation involved, this next generation is looking at that. What are you doing to support the entire person? And so if you want to remain competitive, then you need to be making these changes. And I see other people in the chat talking about how it's more important how it's cheaper to keep someone than train someone new. Absolutely. That turnover is a really high cost in there too. So what can we do to keep the same people? And also just with talent and, looking at everything with turnover, you have relationships, you have talent, you are taking time to support somebody new and what they have to offer. There's a lot that goes into that. So going towards employee satisfaction, it goes a long way to make sure that people feel welcome and supported in what they're doing.
We have another question. Would Nami be able to help someone who's looking to help someone else? Not necessarily a colleague, but a non-work related friend. Any resources for that?
Absolutely. If you call our helpline, it's 919-848-4490, which is specifically for Wake County. I do not, I can look up Nami, North Carolina right now. And it's people who are there with lived experience who are able to listen. In this past year, we have found that we have a lot of people calling on behalf of somebody else. Most of it has been related to living in living in unsafe environments where somebody will not feel comfortable calling for themselves out of fear of what somebody else in the house on the other side of the door or wall could hear. So somebody else is calling on their behalf. And so that's completely common across the spectrum of things. Even if you're calling some of the bigger hotlines and crisis lines, they're there for that too.
Thank you. We have another question. Ross Yeager wants to know, he says, I know none of us have been in a situation like this before, but I'm interested in your thoughts on this. He says, what should we be mindful of as folks begin to integrate back into an office setting? I know I'm thinking about that as well. And this may not be a smooth transition for some of us. So what should we be keeping in mind?
I think the biggest thing is that just because you change your location doesn't mean that your mindset changes, that there are going to be the anxieties about catching COVID, about, what does my health look like? What is happening for childcare? What about anybody else who I'm taking care of? Any grief that was on loss of a loved one. If there's something where it might not be COVID, but you're nervous about catching something else, the stress, grief, anxiety that you are feeling right now isn't going to go away just because you're in another setting. And so be mindful that this isn't going to be a light switch. And there are times where it might feel like a light switch. I know that last week when it was sunny out, I was in such a better mood. I was working outside. I am feeling great. But also keeping in mind that it doesn't go away, that this was a traumatic year. A lot of things happened. And so keep in mind that there's a lot of factors in this, and just continue to give yourself grace that the way things were working before wasn't like that was always the best for people's mental health either. If you were doing 60 to 80 hour work weeks, that probably wasn't the best for your overall well-being either. So what can we do to be mindful of what everyone is experiencing and that things might not go as planned?
We have another question. Are there any resources that are specific to veterans?
Yes. So there is the Raleigh Vet Center. Obviously, the Veterans Affairs office in Durham. We have a new person on our working within NAMI, and she's our military and veterans liaison. And right now she's looking to learn more she's focused on a needs assessment right now for where people are getting help and why they might not be getting help from other places, or what can we do to best serve that community. NAMI has a program called Homefront that's available online, and it's specifically designed for family members of military members and veterans on how to understand changes within veterans and militaries and what moves forward that way. I hope I'm not sure if I'm addressing that question, but there are specific groups that are looking to do more within the veteran community and what we can do better.
Let's see here, looking through the chat. What ways can we support remote coworkers who are experiencing telework or Zoom burnout? And what are some ways to identify that in ourselves and others? I know that we've got professional Zooms, and then we've got personal Zooms. It's been a whole year of Zoom. So what are some ways to identify burnout and take care of that?
I absolutely agree with that. We had our fundraiser in August, and the attendance was low, but I'll be honest, at that point of the year, it's like, I don't want to look at my computer anymore. I was ready to throw my computer against the wall. I was like, I'm done with this. I don't want to look at a computer screen anymore. I don't want to talk to anyone on a computer screen anymore. So don't. Well, I started to take walking meetings where I'm on the phone with somebody as opposed to looking at a computer screen. And so I'm outside, I'm walking. People do make fun of me because they hear me breathing heavy as I'm going up hills, as there are a lot of hills in this area. But don't do it on a computer screen. What can you do to do this? Like, okay, we're on the phone, we're connecting this way. Find other ways to check in. And maybe it's texting, maybe it is just sending a message, sending something dumb, a meme, a GIF, something. And eventually, what could you do to meet people and maybe have a meeting outside, a socially distanced meeting outside that way? With recognizing burnout, I think that you're able be aware of changes that you see. If somebody who's normally there on screen is now being, putting up, not turning their camera on, is somebody who's normally fully, dressed, everything there is a little bit more disheveled. What are changes in what they're doing in their mood? I think with Zoom, you're still able to read some body language of if somebody's engaged versus if they're more sullen and despondent. You're able to see a little bit more of that and just talking to them. It's like, how are you doing? Maybe stopping the work part and just kind of focus on what's happening with you, doing quick check-ins that way. And if you're not quite sure if you're the best person for that, Hopeline, North Carolina has a service where they can call people for you. And if you're like, I'm not too sure about this person, I'm not quite sure what to do, I think somebody should check in on them. If you call Hopeline, North Carolina, they'll call them up. Or if you send them a message, they'll reach out to them and just see how they're doing, saying, hey, somebody thought you might need someone to talk to.
Thank you. Amanda, I do see your hand, but we've got a question that goes really nicely with the one that we just talked about. So we will get to you next, I promise. So Bridgetta was asking, some of us are living with, some people, do live with a mental illness and had to expend tremendous energy to get out and about every day before COVID. I know that I personally am an introvert, and some of us actually felt tremendous relief to work from home for so long, and, to have an excuse not to go out in the evenings. And the thought for some of us, the thought of going back actually can be kind of overwhelming. So are you hearing that? Do you have any suggestions for coping with that and helping people get through that? The anxiety of the return to normal?
I agree. And I don't know what it's going to look like. But if we're talking about what type of accommodations, excuse me, if you're looking at the ADA, and mental illness does fall under the Americans with Disabilities Act. You have to establish that this is a long-term, not a temporary thing. But I think what employers are seeing now is that people are able to work remotely. I think before there was this feeling of if anyone said they're working from home, it was always they're working from home. And it wasn't given enough credit that work can actually be done remotely. And so I think that this is something that we will be able to ask for as far as reasonable accommodations now that employers are able to see, yes, work can be done. If I'm looking to say, I need to work from home a few days of the week, what can we do about this? I think it's something that we can start having those conversations that what can we do so it's not 100% in the office 9 to 5 or whatever your hours were before. But yes, I have seen that, heard that. I'm enjoying working from home. I know that on my sad days, as you're talking about how can we see people through Zoom, if you're ever in a meeting with me and you see me on my couch, I'm surrounded by cats, and it's because I just needed some extra cuddles. And so that's how everybody who works with me knows, like, Annie's not having a good day. She's on her couch and she's in sweatpants surrounded by cats. So if you're able to make accommodations, go for it. And I appreciate all the feedback that's happening in the chat. So as I mentioned, I do what I can, but there's so many other resources that are available out there.
Annie, I was thinking about that would also be a great suggestion for as people start transitioning back into the workplace, that maybe employers, managers, department heads offer that as an opportunity for people to easily transition back into the workplace that first 2 or 3 months, as opposed to just going full blast back.
I agree. I think that this needs to be done in a transition period wherever people's comfort level is. Reno, right now we've been accommodating to who needs it the most. As I mentioned at the beginning, my husband is a teacher and he has been working remotely from school. Then it was hybrid, and they're talking about having all the kids come back at once. But if you looked at the beginning of this pandemic, because teachers all hang out with each other, so I know a whole bunch of other teachers, they were able to do so much more for their own mental health during this pandemic by working remotely, that they were able to get more physical, exercise in that made them feel good. They were able to eat healthier meals so they could take the breaks that they needed. And I think that in this transition, it has to be part of it. This isn't going to be, as I mentioned, this isn't going to be a switch where, yes, we're all back now, let's do this, but give people accommodations and what that looks like too. And especially as you're building relationships with your employees and your team members, talk to them one-on-one, because they might not feel comfortable sharing it in a bigger meeting. I know I have people on my team who will not do anything in person until probably August. They're waiting until more people, not only do they have both shots of the vaccine and they've waited a couple weeks for it to work in, but they also want to make sure there's some herd immunity there. And so for me, I've just been playing to where the team is. So yes, I'd love to be able to offer in-person classes again, because there's a lot of people who we haven't been reaching. But if my team isn't comfortable doing it, then we're going to continue doing what we're doing. But we're also going to continue with virtual programming too, because we've been able to reach a whole lot of new people through doing it.
Thank you. Amanda, do you want to ask your question now?
Yeah, and I'm just going to continue that same discussion. Like, it's been a wave for me. I was super excited to be working from home, getting in extra exercise, eating healthier foods. And then it's like, now I'm getting kind of lonely. Luckily, I have a husband and a cat that are very loving. And so it's great being here. And I would love to stay. It's hard to connect back with coworkers is what I'm finding. So my job is very different from the rest of my coworkers. And when I was in the office, we still got to know each other and see each other because you're walking down the hall. How do you continue connecting with coworkers when you're not working on the same projects because you're teleworking and, they're off doing their own thing?
Great question. And I'd love to also see other input in the chat box as we're talking about this, because I think that it's a unique way to help it's hard to build those relationships. I worked remotely as a consultant for people. I had a year in 2017 where I was doing consulting work in Oregon and Florida. And I was at an elementary school in Florida that started at 7 a.m. And in Oregon, they were working until 6 p.m., which was 9 p.m. Eastern. And so it was a very long day of, okay, how do I continue to meet people? The way that it was able to work is doing, our regular check-ins, if it's Zoom, text message, but also finding ways to keep it fun. And if there's understanding like, oh, maybe we can play this game. Maybe there's something else where we can still keep it casual and have just that informal get together chat at the beginning of the day. I don't know how much that it's helpful, but it's tough coming all together and with everyone's jobs being different. And some people have been in the office or some people have been essential workers on the front lines doing things all the time. So it's harder. It's like, oh, I can't connect with you during Zoom because you're working, you're moving around doing things all the time. But what are some outdoor hangouts that we can do? What are some things that we can do outside? I know that with Raleigh Parks, they're trying to do more outside events now. So maybe it's a get together that you can do, or maybe finding a way to host, a Zoom yoga session or a Zoom mindfulness workshop where everybody can do mental health things and be together. We do affirmation workshops once a month. The next one's coming up tomorrow. So if you're interested in taking an affirmations class and building your toolbox, I think it's happening at noon tomorrow. If you go on our website, you'll be able to learn more about it. Everything that we do is free. And so what are things that you can do together that'll help both of you at the same time? And maybe it's asking them and say like, hey, I really would like to do this Zoom affirmations workshop. I'm a little embarrassed. Do you mind coming with me? And showing that vulnerability, it's a lot easier than just asking a whole group, because if you send it out through a group email, you're going to get crickets. And so just building those connections helps to get more people.
Thank you. And thank you for everyone's tips on the chat. That's really helpful.
It is. I know that we're okay. So we're kind of reaching the end of our time here, I think. So we want to make sure that everybody has questions. Shelley, have you got a question?
I do. I had the benefit of meeting Annie virtually yesterday, and you mentioned a comment about those who are well-intentioned, but perhaps don't take the correct approach. So I wanted to ask you to, kind of give the same spill to the rest of the group, because I know there's those of us who are very excited and want to help everyone, but aren't necessarily equipped with the correct tools or experience.
Thank you. Yes. So there's new research that's coming out on trauma-sensitive mindfulness, and specifically trauma-sensitive mindfulness meditation, because people, their mindfulness and meditation have been these crazes that have come up, and they've been a lot more popular, and everybody wants to do them. However, when people have experienced trauma, it's mostly hidden in their body. And so what you are doing is, as you're focused on mindfulness and what am I doing, you're opening yourself up to focus on the different parts of where trauma is hidden in your body. For instance, one form of mindfulness is to do a body scan, and you tighten up different parts of your body and you feel it. Where are we this way? If someone's had an eating disorder, then they might not feel comfortable with that. As they're going through it, they're just feeling, wow, my body's a lot bigger here than it should be. Or people who have been first responders have a hard time with breathing exercises. And that's also been studied in the Black, Indigenous, people of color community, especially in the wake of seeing more of the horrific videos that have been out of killings and death, that they have a hard time focusing on breathing exercises. And so what you're doing, as opposed to helping somebody and working through these mindfulness practices that do have a lot of research that on how it helps calm people down and helps ease mood, is that you're not helping that, because they're all focused on where their trauma is and where their pain is. And they're not feeling calm. And so it's one more thing that is focused on them, where they're thinking, I can't do this, and I am a failure, and I can't even get this mindfulness right. I'm not going to heal well. So it's important that as you're doing things, to learn a little bit more about it and not assume that you are an expert in it. I know that I'm new to learning about this. The person who has studied it and has put out a book and some webinars and does a series on it, his name is David Trelevin. I can put his name in the chat, and something if Trisha wants to send it out afterwards. But if you're going to just kind of take a minute, don't have people just focus on their breath, but give them at least one alternative. So maybe it's, instead of saying close your eyes and take a deep breath, and we're going to do, breathe in for 3 seconds, hold for 3, breathe out for 3, instead of doing these breathing exercises where people are focused on their breath and their chest. Maybe you have them do that as they're drawing a square on the wall, or focused on where they are sitting. Have other, where are you grounded, and go from there. But definitely, it's all focused on good intentions, but when you know better, do better, and see what we can do to learn more about things so that we're actually focused on what our intention is.
Thank you so much, Annie. This has been a wonderful discussion. Thank you all so much for participating in this. We've had a lot of changes this year. It's good to know that we all have, a lot of the same anxieties and questions and concerns. And I think that this was a productive discussion. We've had a lot of changes, and we're fixing to have another big change, and that can create a lot of anxiety. in people, especially, those of us who have, worked from home full time this year. So as we're going back into the office, some of us will have missed the office and some of us will be anxious about it. If you're one of those people who's missed the office, think about maybe taking transit to work to see some people. We've got the social distancing and the protocols that we have for that to make it as safe as possible. You might consider maybe carpooling with some coworkers. Try that out as you've, if everybody's vaccinated or if you're in a pod with somebody. And we do have resources to help you find a carpool that might work for you. So if you have any questions or anything about commuting back to the office, we can certainly help with that. And Annie, you've helped so much today with everybody's concerns just in general about mental health in the workplace. Thank you so much for this. So I will send it back over to Kim, I think, to wrap things up here. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you so much. Annie, that was fantastic. And thanks everybody for joining us. You've made today's discussion fantastic. If you've attended any of the Mission Impossible events in the past, you know that we usually do a drawing for participating in the questionnaire. However, to maintain so that everyone doesn't have to share their identity. This time there was no personal information required on the questionnaire. The information that we're asking will help us out a lot with determining how to proceed with marketing, programming, and it will help us to get a good pulse on the business community. So if you could just take a few minutes, fill it out, and keep your eyes peeled on your email for the next Mission Impossible. We hope that you'll join us.